Okay, looks like you're live. I'll see you later.
Thank you. Welcome to the Lewiston School Committee business meeting, April 20th, 2020. I'm calling this meeting to order. We will begin this evening with an update from Superintendent Finn. Welcome to the Lewiston School Committee business meeting, April 20th, 2020.
Okay, so what I have here is I've got an update on the COVID-19, where we are in terms of phases. We do know that since March 13th, 2020, educator expectations in Lewiston Public Schools have evolved over 3 phases. The committee hopefully has been well informed as to what those phases are and where we're going, but for the public, I'd like to just quickly review those. Phase 1 was the initial school closure. That lasted from March 16th until March 27th. Nutrition meal sites were set up and running for students to include mobile sites, staff given time to attend to the shift in family needs, their own family needs during the initial closure. We offered home learning options for parents to access via the LPS website that continues to grow each day. There were no new instructional options offered directly from staff due to FAPE challenges. However, those FAPE challenges have since been met. We moved into phase 2 on March 30th, and that will continue through the 17th of April. Those meal sites were still set up. Our buildings have been cleaned top to bottom. We still offer those home learning options for parents. We distributed devices to K-12 students and families. We have been documenting twice weekly communications with students for community and social and emotional learning purposes. We began the implementation of Edgenuity MyPath and courseware online learning platforms grades 7 through 12. The plan was for Edgenuity PathBlazer online learning platform to be implemented through a K through 6, and our principals were trained up on that. The plan for the implementation of other new instructional opportunities offered from staff to students, and the plan for and to begin to address the needs of special education students with regard to new instruction in IEP meetings and expectations. We are currently just about wrapped up with phase 2 of right now our 4-phase operation. Our students and teachers are currently on spring break at this point in time right now. A great opportunity for our teachers to catch their breath, for our students to be able to gear up for phase 3, which will be the longest, most arduous of all of our phases. That's going to run through the end of the school year, which right now technically is June 8th, 2020. I would like to ask for Chief Academic Officer Karen Paquette to address the committee regarding phase 3. And the reason I'd like to do that is because Karen and her team really dug in deep, and they enlisted the assistance of what we call the TAG, T-A-G, the Teacher Advisory Group, which is a group of 12 of our teachers in the district to help vet what the phase 3 ideas could look like. This is the heaviest lifting. This is where, in our opinion, this is where we're going to make our hay in Lewiston Public Schools. A lot of the infrastructure has been laid out already for this. And Karen, I'd like to hand this section to you so you can talk to the committee about what phase 3 looks like in Lewiston Public Schools.
Sure, I'd be happy to. So you're going to hear tonight some of the work that has been happening at the high school level. So I'll speak more to the K-8 level. So at the K-8 level, probably about 2 weeks ago, half weeks ago, knowing that phase 3 was coming, we began to plan what that might look like. Jana Mates, principal at Lewiston Middle School, and her leadership team began drafting some plans for the middle school, and then my team, as well as elementary principals, began drafting a plan for K-6. And ultimately, what that looks like, teachers were made aware of those plans last week. What that ultimately looks like is PathBlazer is up and ready to go for our K-6 students. Our elementary teachers have been working on getting trained themselves. It was a quick turnaround. So between the end of last week and this is spring break, so the beginning of next week, they will be getting their training. And then as they connect with students throughout the week after spring break, so next week, they'll begin to give usernames and passwords to students, and so that students can get started. So the idea would be that all students starting May 4th will have their username and password for PathBlazer K6, and they will get started. Something just to add about PathBlazer, for all students who took the NWEA assessment, they will be placed based on that assessment in PathBlazer. So when they log in, they'll be ready to go. And for students who didn't participate in that, we assigned sort of an exploratory area until we can get in and really fine tune where those students need to be. So all students will have something up and ready to go when they log in. And then the second part of that work at K-8 or even pre-K-8 involves teachers in working together in teams to plan some new instructional opportunities for students. So for example, in other districts, teachers planning and giving instruction based for their own class. And in Lewiston, what we decided to do, and it was well received by our teacher advisory group, especially at the K-6 level, pre-K-6 level, is that grade levels will share that planning. So for example, we have 5 weeks. So for example, the 5th grade team at one school will plan for the week of May 4th, and then another 5th grade team will plan for the following week, and so on and so forth, building upon what's available to students in PathBlazer. So we're asking teachers to plan some activities and some practice in the area of science and social studies, as well as some additional pieces in reading and in math, or literacy and math. So folks can expect to see that. We have a standard format that teachers will be using, and we've asked our teachers to create sort of a sneak peek of the week video, so that at the beginning of every week, that will be out and available for students and for other teachers, parents, community members to see what the topic or the theme of the week would be. I think those are the highlights. As Superintendent Finn said, my team did meet with the teacher advisory group just before these expectations were put out to teachers, and we got some great questions, and we're able to make some adjustments, I think, to make the plan even better and manageable for both students and teachers and parents in Lewiston.
So that being said, Jake later on this evening is going to go a little bit deeper into some innovative ideas that we have, so we can actually leverage this, believe it or not, this opportunity that we've got here to continue learning even beyond the 8th of June for a lot of our learners who can actually benefit from this at the high school level. But I'll reserve that because it's really kind of a cool idea that Jake and his team have for a little bit later on. I will say this, is that I could not be any more proud of the teachers we have in Lewiston. I certainly would not say that if it wasn't true. I do believe we've got the best teachers in the entire state of Maine. The way that they have rallied and the way that they have shown some innovation allows me to be quite confident in believing that when this lifts, and it will lift someday soon, a lot of that innovation will allow our folks to realize what they can actually be and incorporate that into everyday learning as well, and take learning to a whole different level, as we plan to do in Lewiston Public Schools. As we customarily do, we'll put an operations order out to the entire district, all of our teachers. Of course, the committee will get a copy of that too. That will go out on May 1st. It'll essentially just really outline the paragraphs, if you will, situation, missions, expectations, service and support, and communication around that phase. But again, I'm really excited about this upcoming phase. Really want to get started on it, but also I'm I'm thrilled that our teachers have had the time to be trained. The last thing that we want to do is have a great idea blow up in our faces because we weren't ready for that. I think that school districts across Maine and across America have experienced that with other endeavors. The patience and the professionalism that I've seen from Karen Piquette and her team, supported by Bobby Avery and her team, have really allowed us to be in a very nice position coming up. So I know it was a little bit long of an update, but this is the heaviest piece, and we're getting ready to get into it now. So that's all I've got.
Thank you, Superintendent Finn. And I just want to remind the public that we do have an email set up for public comment. And you can write into LPS public comments at lewistonpublicschools.org. So we can take that into account. Going to move on to agenda item number 3, which is the consent agenda. Are there any items that members want to remove from the consent agenda? Where did Kieran go? Okay. Sorry, I can't see one member. I'm trying to expand my screen. Right.
Here.
Are there, Kieran, did you have anything?
No, just same as last time. I think that we have to do it by roll call.
Okay. Well, right. Sorry. My computer is very, very slow tonight. So I'll go through. Megan Parks, do you have any objections?
No.
Bruce Damon?
No.
I don't. Kiernan Majerus Collins? Member
I don't have any. I don't have any objections.
Member Whitlow?
No.
Member Potvin?
No.
Member Ray? Miss Ray?
No objections.
Okay. Hearing no objections, the consent agenda is adopted. Okay, moving on to agenda item number 4, public input. Todd, are there any emails with public comment at this time?
No, ma'am, not yet, but we can revisit that at the end of the night if you like.
Okay, this would be for non-agenda items.
Non-agenda items, correct.
Moving on to agenda item number 5, to receive and approve the second reading of the 2020-2021 Lewiston Public Schools Personnel Policy. Director Monique Gilbert will present.
Thank you. So this is the second reading, and there's only been one change. Appendix B, page 16, food service substitutes and lunch monitors. The hourly rate was changed to $12 per hour to meet the minimum wage requirement.
Madam Chair, I'd like to make a motion to approve the second reading of the personnel policies for 2020 to 2021.
Thank you, Ms. Ray.
Second.
Thank you, Ms. Parks. Is there any discussion? We will do a roll call vote. Starting with Ms. Parks, Member Parks.
Yes. I never know what to say. I'm sorry. Yes, I support it.
Thank you. Mr. Damon,
Yes.
I support it. Mr. Majerus Collins,
Yes.
Ms. Whitlow,
Yes.
Mr. Potvin, I didn't hear you, Mr. Potvin.
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Ray,
Yes.
that is a unanimous vote. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Gilbert. Agenda item number 6, to receive and approve the second reading of a proposed policy change regarding sick leave due to the contraction of the COVID-19 virus. Chief Administrative Officer Bobby Avery will present.
Yes, thank you. Good evening. So before you in your packet, you do have a revised draft or redlined draft of the COVID-19 salary, benefit, and sick leave procedure. This has been fully vetted multiple times by Dan Stockford, our attorney. We worked very hard on this document. So what you see are the change before you are the changes that Attorney Stockford has recommended. Do you wish that I go through them, or have you all had the opportunity to go through them?
I'll go through and just ask if each member has anything that they have questions about clarification before we get into discussion. So Ms. Parks, do you have any clarifying questions for Ms. Avery?
I just want to make sure, I confirmed it the last time, but I want to follow up and make sure that if and when this passes, all staff, but specifically the food service workers, will be backdated and reimbursed for any leave time they've used to date.
That's correct. And I should note that this protocol here, this procedure is based on law. So you'll see a lot of language in here that comes directly from the law. But yes, Ms. Parks, yes.
Mr. Damon, do you have clarifying questions?
No, but I'm glad to see that it was modified. I'm good.
Thank you. Mr. Majerus Collins, do you have clarifying questions?
I would just ask, in the interest of any members of the viewing public, that Ms. Avery provide a short summary of what changed between last time and this time.
Excellent, thank you. Ms. Avery?
Yes, I can do that. So in the first paragraph, we changed, I need to put my glasses on. So we changed the definition of what an eligible employee is. And so an eligible employee is defined as someone who was employed by LPS in an eligible position at the time that the school buildings were closed in March 2020 and remains employed by LPS at the time that compensation is due or leave is requested under this procedure. That change, the prior language was that the employee needed to be an employee of LPS for at least 30 days. So the recommended change from our attorney was to change that to no specific date and time as far as 30 days is concerned. The other change, our attorney had recommended that we remove the definition of family. So that is not included. You'll notice that that's completely redlined. The next change is to cover the expanded FMLA that has to do directly with childcare. And so we added language that speaks to employees may be eligible for up to 10 additional weeks of paid leave under the expanded FMLA provisions of the Families First Coronavirus Response Act solely for the purpose of caring for a child whose school or place of care is closed or whose child care provider is unavailable for reasons related to COVID-19. That was an addition. And then the effective dates, we altered it a little bit, and I'll read it. It says the employee compensation and benefit provisions of this procedure will remain in effect through the end of the 1920 school year. The employee leave provisions of this protocol pursuant to the Families First Coronavirus Response Act will remain in effect through December 31st, 2020. That is law. While school buildings remain closed through the end of the 1920 school year, and we remove the word all, and we said employees, including emergency personnel, will not be expected to utilize their accrued sick leave
or earned leave time for any illness of the employee. Those are the changes.
I have two clarifying questions, one of which is fairly minor. It looks like you've got 2019-2010 school year in the effective dates.
Yes, I see
so
that.
Yep.
We'll
And
fix that.
then I also just wanted to ask about the rationale for structuring the employee compensation aspect of this as remaining in effect only through the end of the 2019-2020 school year, and what plans we might have to revisit this if that's not enough.
That's a good question. So this gets us through the remainder of this school year as far as compensation is concerned. And then what will happen is, depending on what happens in the fall, if we have to come back to the school committee, we'll come back and make an additional recommendation at that time. It was discussed, we went back and forth on this, but it was discussed that we should have a cutoff period, and then we can always add on to that at a later date and time if it's needed.
Ms. Whitlow?
I don't have anything.
Okay. Mr. Potvin, clarifying questions.
Yes, Bobby, I just want to know if, I know we're contractually binded to pay the employees their salaries. Are we also contractually binded to have to pay the stipends? Or are those, is there an option there?
Yeah, so how I read this, Mr. Potvin, there's a lot of our spring coaches and advisors that have already received employment agreements. So they've already got their contract. So those, we've already offered them employment. So it's our recommendation, and when I say ours, I'm speaking regarding Brandon Isaacson, as well as administration, that we do pay those contracts, that we do pay those stipended positions. Now, I should say the any hiring that's being done for the fall at this point, clearly, I mean, we'll continue to hire, but I think we're going to hold on to those employment agreements until we get closer to the fall.
All set, Mr. Potvin? Ms. Ray, do you have clarifying questions?
Yes, thank you. Under the effective dates, Ms. Avery, does that bind us in any way? I know we are going to have a different budget discussion going forward, but in terms of if there ends up being a need for changing employment arrangements going into next fiscal year, does this language bind us, or will we be able to work around that?
I'm not sure if I fully understand your question. Are you thinking if we, I guess I need more clarification.
If there ends up being a workforce reduction on the school committee side.
So as going into 21, so as far as 20 is concerned, we have an obligation to pay their contracts. As far as 21 is concerned, this law does bring us right through December. So if we, I'm trying to think of a scenario and I haven't thought of one yet, but if we, I don't think, my guess is that I don't think that it applies, because if we do enter into that situation, they're not going to be employed.
Okay, that's helpful. Thank you.
Great. Okay. I'll entertain a motion if there's one out there.
Move to adopt the policy as written.
Second.
Okay. So that was Majerus Collins for the first, and then Ms. Parks for the second. And let's do the roll call. Ms. Parks?
Yes.
Madam Chair, is there not
Yes.
further opportunity?
Oh,
Is
yeah,
there not-
sorry. Discussion.
Thank
Yes,
you.
I apologize. Discussion. Ms. Parks, do you have any discussion on the topic? I'm just going to go
No.
through everybody. Okay.
No.
Mr. Damon, discussion?
I guess the only question really, or clarification after we've done the first round, current employees that are under contract today, if they choose not to re-up, but before the end of December, if something should happen, would they still be eligible for the 10 weeks of paid leave because they're currently employed now? Would that bind us because this thing says through the end of the year?
So no, if they choose to, are you talking about an employee that chooses to resign?
Or says that they're affected by COVID-19 and that's the reason why they can't continue?
So if they're going to be on staff, if they're going to remain on staff, then yes, we're obligated to adhere to this. If they choose to resign for whatever reason, then no. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I guess if they're not employed, that would make sense. I'm just wondering if we get to end of August, we're looking to go back to school. Somebody says, well, now I need an additional 10 weeks because of something else has happened.
Oh, so the 10 weeks only applies to childcare. So if they're still employed with us and they do have childcare issues that's due to COVID-19, then yes, under the law, we are obligated to provide that to them. If they fall into one of those categories that we talked about the last time that's in this protocol, then yes, we are obligated to adhere to that as well. If they, we go back to school in the fall and they again say, I'm just not comfortable coming in, with the circumstances, the law does allow us to say they need to be ready and able to come into work. And if they specifically elect not to come into work and they are ready and able, they don't fall into one of those categories, then they either come into work or they don't, and that's a different discussion.
Would that lead to termination?
It possibly could, yes.
Okay. I'll go along with supporting it at this point. Yes.
All right, we're not doing the vote yet, but thank you.
Okay, I'm sorry, I thought-
That was me. That was because I started doing a roll call, but I just want to see if there's more discussion out there. Mr. Maduris Collins,
I have no further discussion other than to urge the adoption.
thank you. Ms. Whitlow,
I have no discussion.
Mr. Potvin,
So Bobby, I got two items. First, my understanding is we received a chunk of money from the federal to help address the coronavirus impact. Will any of that money be able to be put forward to any additional expenses that are incurred by this action? And then the second one, I guess, would be, well, I'll let you answer the first one first.
Okay, so we have not received any federal funding yet. We are due to receive federal funding, but we haven't received it yet. The answer to your question is yes. Well, not necessarily pertaining to this that we're talking about, but you're going to hear more about this Wednesday night during our budget workshop about the CARES Act and the funding that comes along with that. So there will be funding that we can utilize to help reduce some expenses budget-wise, but towards our salaries and benefits, not so much.
The second piece is a lot of response from the public, just asking the basic question, what is it we're doing here? To clarify for the public, is there anything regards to this that is not mandated contractually or mandated from the federal government or mandated by FMLA that we actually have some sort of option that we're doing on our own? I just want to clarify that this is kind of stuff that we have to do. So can you address?
Yes, and so this language is built, it's written based on law. There is one small little piece, but it has been, you did discuss it quite a bit the last time, and that's around the word any. So it's around the word any sickness currently as we're closed. So that is in addition to the law, but everything else is based on law.
Okay,
Okay,
good.
Ms. Ray?
Thank you. I think my question actually might bounce to Ms. Paquette or Mr. Finn. So I am very in support of the policy in terms of how it takes care of our employees, but it does leave me with a nagging question about if someone does need to take the 10 weeks or other leave that's provided for in this package, how are we providing for students who are under the care of that teacher? I know Mr. Finn and Ms. Paquette just spoke about their plans for educators and their outreach to families and students. How do we sub in for that if someone does choose to participate in this part of the plan?
Karen, would you like to address that first?
So let me make sure I would, sure. Let me make sure I understand your question. So if a teacher or a staff member takes the 10 weeks because of this, you're asking how we would cover their duties and checking in with their students. Is that your question?
Yes.
Okay, so we actually have been working with principals to see if team members can support with that currently, if for some reason the teacher isn't available. If when we were to come back to school in the fall and this was in place, then we would certainly have someone subbing for that teacher and making sure that all of those things were taken care of.
Okay, so there would be no further budgetary impact anticipated in this year?
Not that I'm aware of, no.
Okay, great.
And so to expand on that, thank you, Karen, for that. You know, one thing that we don't believe in the Lewiston Public Schools, at least in the administration, is we don't believe in single points of failure. So at any point in time, I think that we might call that in Patriots slang, we might call that next man up, right? So in the event that somebody falls victim to this virus or really anything else, whether it be at the superintendent's office, all the way throughout our entire continuum in our schools, we worked hard to make sure that we have that COOP plan, and that is that continuance of operations plan. And that includes those classrooms as well. What I love about what Karen and her team worked really hard to do was to ensure that there was a teaming approach in the event that a cluster of 4 teachers had one that needed to take a break for whatever reason. We could still continue that as well. And so Member Ray, I shared that concern as well too. I thought, what will happen? I mean, we at one point in time, we did have a couple of teachers that came down with a flu on the same team, and we thought, we were watching that very closely early on. I'm pleased to say that the COOP plan looks as though it'll continue working throughout the rest of this school year. So we would not have to hire on an external substitute and have that budgetary impact. These are scenarios that Bobby, Karen, and I talk about on a regular basis. I think it's a great question, but I'm very proud of the fact that our curriculum office has got it covered.
That's awesome. Thank you.
Okay. I'm just going to look real quick. Any further discussion? Okay. I'm going to now do the roll call for the actual vote. Ms. Parks?
Yes.
Mr. Damon?
Yes.
Myself, yes. Mr. Majerus Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Whitlow?
Yes.
Mr. Potvin?
No.
Ms. Ray?
Yes.
Okay. The vote is 6-1 with 1 opposed. Mr. Potvin. Okay. Agenda item number 7, to receive and approve the proposed LHS grading and credit system. Lewiston High School Principal Jake Langless will present.
Hi, everyone. I'm going to share my screen if that's okay. All right, so I have some updates for you and also information around what we discussed prior around modifying graduation requirements for students. I'm using a presentation, so I can't see everyone. So if you have a question, if you wouldn't mind just kind of giving me a verbal pause. So there's a lot of factors to consider, of course. I saw some of these through different research and different messaging that's gone on consistently through the pandemic, but stress related to COVID-19 will negatively impact student academic performance. Student academic performance during school closures is more likely to reflect racial, economic, language, disability, and resource differences. Some communities are asking teachers to provide high quality instruction remotely, for which most are inadequately prepared. Learning must continue, but it cannot be forced or consequence driven. And we're in this together. The parent wanting the best for their kids happens to be all of us. Teachers want the best for their students and their own children who are home. And we have an electronic tool that will assist in the delivery and also provide us some consistency. Before I dive too deep, I do want to thank and recognize the administrative team. We've been working hard at a lot of things to try to think of every angle that we can. The staff, teachers, ed techs, everyone who's provided input to this process, and also our facilities nutrition staff for their ongoing work. We wouldn't be where we are without them. I also want to thank the students and parents and recognize them for the many challenges they face in times of ambiguity, stress, and the challenges of the pandemic. Superintendent Finn, his team, worked a lot with Karen and her team, and making sure that we're doing things as the right way as much as we can. So the proposed graduation criteria, and some of this is follow-up from our prior conversation, but the minimum achievement of 18 total credits, as 11 are required by the state, with a minimum of the following content-specific credits earned: 2 math, 2 social studies, 2 science, and 1 lab is an addition that's state required. 4 English, I had looked into doing 3, but 4 is also state required. 1 visual performing arts, 1 health and phys ed. And then the makeup of that would be 6 additional or elective, some mix of elective courses, credits. So this would be an allowable modification to graduation requirements that recognizes the work stoppage due to the school closure in response to COVID-19. So doing some data review, we talked last time about, I believe on the 6th, about what would this look like if we use this criteria. So we did some data mining and figured out how different things would project. And it would put us at 74.9% on pace to graduate with this criteria. Another 9.9% within reach. These would be students that through the month of May and shortly thereafter would have to recover standards, portions of a class, or in some cases, continue work they're already doing in an outside of the school day recovery effort. And 15.2% are well behind. There may be some kids on the bubble in that group. They would have to make a significant push with really impressive outputs to be considered for graduation this current year. So our approach to the spring and what to do next. We looked at it from 3 different lenses. One is the now, the students and parents want to know and also need to know. The gap in time, students need to continue to learn. So how are we going to cover from where we are to the end of the school year, and also accelerate in future. One thing that no, we don't want to do is hold learning back. We do have some students that are very actively engaged, and we want to provide them every opportunity we can. So to talk more about the now, we tell students where they stand. We close grades as soon as possible. With this being the vacation week and the need to do some interpretation, I think with school committee direction and Superintendent Finn's approval, we would start this communication with teachers the first of the week, although they are aware of this plan. And then once grades are closed, students can make a plan with their teacher for makeup that aligns to the work that was turned in prior to March 13th, and the teacher's syllabi retake expectations if they failed the course or assessments. Plans are made, and then work would need to be completed and submitted by May 29th. We kept May 29th in there because there's still, I think, a glimmer of hope that we have graduation on the 5th, and the 29th is the standing date for grades to be completed by seniors, so we can do our validation process to find out who actually will march. The gap in time. What we'd like to do is provide units of study for the gap in time using the online platforms. This would not be a whole course. This would be kind of the end of the year portions of the course. And so that students in areas, especially like math, could continue to grow and access the learning that they might have had if we were in school, and ensure that they're prepared for whatever's next. And due to considerations, these would not be factored into the grades. And those considerations, again, include those equity components. And accelerate in future. Courses for credit are available for students. We want to use an electronic form so students can fill out different interests they have and access Edgenuity and assign courses to them. Teachers have been learning in Edgenuity. They've been assigned classes of their own so they can see what it's like for a student to experience their own content. And we would look for ways to best pair a class with a teacher and also a student who has an interest so they could get credit. This would be above and beyond what's available in their schedule for the year. Students would have until July 31st to complete the courses. That's an important date. I'll get into that in a few minutes. But these completed courses would be added to the transcript with credit and count towards all things transcript. So this is that accelerated component. And from a future perspective, we know that we can offer these things right through the summer, but also thinking ahead for the fall and what things may pop up in the future. As a learning organization, we'll get better with the tools of Edgenuity. Students develop familiarity with the functionality of the programming with this direction. And should we face this again, we would have a smooth transition, really because we would have established routines and people would know what to expect.
Mr. Langless,
Yes.
I have a question. If you could go back to the last slide.
Sure.
I don't understand the courses for credit. Like, are students who are in Algebra 2, let's say, can they get Algebra 2 and finish their content for full credit? What do you mean by that?
Yep. So accelerate in future is a whole separate criteria. So the now component, we would close the grades and allow students to do makeup if need be. We open up additional learning, but it wouldn't count towards their grade. So that they would already be able to get their grade with what evidence they've provided to date or makeup. We would provide opportunities to learn things that they would have covered. So for example, Algebra 1, there are components towards the end of the year in Algebra 1 that are useful to students to have in geometry, Algebra 2 and beyond. And so we want to make sure we provide that, try to fill that gap a little bit. This is a whole separate one. This would be, that student says, man, I really like the environment. I want to take an environmental science class and that's not available to me right now. Well, we can look for options within the tool and find a teacher that would work with the student to do that. So this would be a credit that's not currently assigned or in their schedule. So that's why we looked at accelerate in future. So this would go beyond the school year, especially with the pause that we've had. If kids are interested in continuing to learn, we want to provide that opportunity.
Would those be considered elective credits then?
They don't have to be. They could be core credits.
Okay. Thank you.
You're welcome. So we did pitch out the idea to staff. I really felt it important. Our whole administrative team felt it important. And our teachers have been communicating regularly, and I appreciate and applaud them for that. And they give me real input, not just the, we think it's great stuff. So it's really been beneficial and it's been a good process, I feel. Maybe not perfect, but we've done some good things. So we asked them to provide feedback on this plan to close out grades, provide a window for makeup, and look for ways to fill in the gap in the future. And as it relates to close out the grades and then move forward, the teachers were given 4 areas. I can support it, I can live with it, I'm neutral, but I support what is decided, and I cannot support this. And we had 69 responses of our teachers. And by breakdown, you can see that respectively, the different categories, but we had over 98% that can support it, live with it, or support what's decided. So we have gotten teacher feedback on that process, and I think we can feel pretty good about that feedback.
Mr. Langless,
Yes.
can I ask how many were surveyed with 69 responding?
I sent the link out to our entire staff.
And how many members is that?
Receiving that would have been probably 275 whole school. That's teachers.
Were there other components that, and this question was optional, or?
This was the only question put out in the survey itself.
Thank you.
Mhm. So graduation and events, this is hot on everyone's mind. As soon as we can move forward, which I think is soon, I want to be able to message out to our seniors where we're at. But we want to provide options to seniors, and we want to poll them also. Any scheduled event that is subject to cancellation based on the recommendations for public safety, the public safety recommendations, CDC, governor, what have you, we're going to be mindful of those things. Decision for graduation schedule on June 5th will be made and shared. We chose the date of May 11th, trying to be strategic because we need enough time to secure the space and the items to hold the ceremony. Due to the pandemic, if we cannot hold graduation on June 5th, we will enact a summer plan for seniors. And the summer plan would include things that we postponed and try to push them to July, which might be a safer window of time. We're not doing that yet, but if it happens, I know that our community is seemingly very committed, as am I, to having some kind of ceremony. If it's at all possible, we want to make sure that happens. And so if it can be done, it may be in person, it may be blended, some kind of combination. And we don't want to cancel this, but again, we'll follow the recommendations. The blended portion is there are options out there for virtual graduations. I personally am not a huge fan, but I wouldn't mind a blended one if we did something late so that students who couldn't be there because they've gone into the military or they're away or have to work and can't make it, they would have the opportunity to see themselves up on a screen and live stream the event. A hard date around June 29th to announce the decision of what we will have and what we will not, and in what format. We're trying to give people a reasonable amount of time to plan themselves. And the thinking around these dates are connected to the anticipation of what I hope will be good public safety information for the July 14th primary vote. I think in my mind, if we're safe to go vote, we may be safe to gather and have a good ceremony for our kids who have worked all their lives and deserve it. So we put together this, we have a whole spreadsheet with who's doing what, but I didn't want to overwhelm the slide. But this could be a tentative week, looking at the week of July 27th. On Tuesday the 28th, have a real world prep graduation, which has always been a very big moment. On Wednesday, we do something with top 10 athletic recognitions and have some kind of event in the evening, like a bonfire. Excuse me, I skipped on Tuesday, potentially have a prom. Thursday, some senior events during the day, and then have a night of excellence, which is where we give out recognitions to students who have earned scholarships and things of that nature. Friday, National Honor Society induction, and look at a Saturday graduation, potentially in the evening under the lights on the field. So that's the end of what I have for slides. I'm willing to review anything you'd like or answer any questions. I have a list of some documents here that we've developed. If you'd like to see drafts of anything, please just feel free to let me know, and I'm willing to share anything requested.
Thank you, Mr. Langlis. So I will do what we did for the other items, where I will just go through and see if there are any clarifying questions for Mr. Langlis. And I will start that with Ms. Parks.
What was the May 11th date that you said?
We were looking at that as a date to decide if we could have graduation on June 5th or not.
Okay, Mr. Damon?
Jake, I noted that EL had set a standard of 20. Would that drastically change your numbers?
We actually didn't run the number of 20. I'm sure it would impact them to some extent. A lot of it is what the makeup of the credits are, and we cover those core credits. We have 24 in our typical graduation. I know EL went with, was it 20 you said?
20.
I think that's what I heard from Scott. So that's another number out there for credits. It's interesting to me how we come to these different places. Originally, we started with talking about being a year-long credit issuing school at Lewiston High School, and we have been for a very long time, and there's a lot of good reasons for that. I think when you start to have year-long credits, it gets harder to issue certainly the half credits, but it also makes it cumbersome in what will you issue to a student who stopped going to school March 13th. And so we've had to try to strike some middle ground. And I think that's why we went with so much feedback from admin and also teachers.
And there was no consideration about half credits.
We talked about half credits. We kind of kicked it around for a little bit. It got pretty messy for us. If we shift to half credits, because we're not a half credit school, we have to change our reporting to the NCAA and their clearinghouse for our kids and their scholarships. And if we shift that, we have to reissue that document, it can create some confusion. And again, I feel like that would be an area where if we do that midstream, it could negatively impact kids well beyond high school.
Oh, as far as college sports?
Yeah, college sports is a big one. I know that Mr. Fuller and I had to address one 2 years ago. There was a complication around a credit and something on the transcript. And I know that when we did the transcript work before, during, and after all around PBL, one of the things that we kept going back to was making sure that when our kids left us and they went to the NCAA clearinghouse and the way they do their quality points and how they check what credits kids have and what things count for their scholarships, that we would not do anything that would create a road bump for them.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. So I have a question. It wasn't covered here, but what about the students that were seniors in LRTC, and how are they getting their credentials met, especially those who had to do things out in the field and needed specific hours and those kinds of things?
So I don't want to speak for Director Callahan, but I know that's something he's been working hard on. And he's also had some things that are about to start up in Edgenuity. So kids that continue learning using the tool wherever it aligns. The hours in the community, he would be best to answer that question. But I know that in my conversations with Director Callahan, he is working very hard. And also a lot of state organizations are seeing that the credentials may have some, I don't want to say modifications, but a little more room to breathe than typical. I'll use an example from the high school, like with AP testing. The AP testing is not full year. It's the expectations for what you would have learned stopped, and the test will be modified. And there's practice and reviews happening now with that. So Dirk Callahan would be the best one to answer that. But I know that from a high school perspective, I have talked with Rob, and he has said, we'll work out as far as credits are concerned for kids to graduate high school. But as far as industry credentials, that would be a better question for Director Callahan.
Okay. I just want to make sure that they were still all going to be able to graduate. There isn't anybody in that bucket that this would prevent them from graduating. And will this, if this is approved, will this plan in detail be made available for the public to understand all of the bits and pieces?
Yes, great question. So we wrote collaboratively an overview, which gives some good points from, say, 1,000 feet, and then wrote a letter to seniors specifically outlining their criteria, and a letter to grades 9 through 11. And the only thing that we're going to do is come together and make sure that what we intended to put out aligns to this meeting and what the conversation is. It may have a couple of light tweaks, and it's ready to roll.
Okay. And then my last question is for the students who missed out on that last quarter, the last piece of the year. So the semester-based classes, are they losing anything, or is there something they can do to make up for it next year? Or will the effects of this last for like anybody who's a junior going into their senior year? Can you talk just a little bit about the ripple effect and making sure that students are not going to be harmed by this, but also are able to continue on? You talked a little bit about that, but again, making sure skills are built so that if they're moving on to the next subject area where they needed a foundational piece of information, they would be able to do that.
Yep. So the initial plan sharing that I've done with teachers, some of the feedback that I got was about just that. So what's the ripple effect? How do you take care of the semester courses? And the initial thinking for seniors is, unless you have to have that half-year credit for that semester-based course, we're not going to issue credit for them. If you needed it for a credit, I've already had teachers from multiple different areas reach out to me and say, if I've got a kid that needs that credit, I will work with that student. We will find a way. And so I feel good about that. It's less descriptive, but if students need that, we'll know from our school counselor end, and also be able to reach out to the kids, and they can reach out to us. So we'll take care of seniors first. The ripple effect, I think it's a bit of an unknown right now. We've been so focused on seniors and how we navigate the rest of the school year with the changing information. I'm aware of the ripple effect, but I think what we need to look at as a whole, and I think this committee has already said so, at least some in session, that you'd like to look at the graduation criteria as a group as part of your work. This was before COVID-19 popped up. And I would say if we're going to do any of that work, we should consider doing that before we calculate the ripple effect. We will have some students, particularly juniors, who might have limited time to kind of make up this gap because of the semester-based courses. I think what I would do is, once we figure out seniors and we get this summer under our belt, I may have to come back to you and say, for juniors, this is an appropriate accommodation if that's needed. And I want to pair that with the work that you've already talked about doing as a committee. If we're going to modify graduation requirements, again, separate of this ripple effect in COVID-19, that may solve some of these concerns on their own.
Excellent. Okay, so more to come then. Thank you.
Mhm.
And Mr. Majerus Collins?
I don't know that I have any questions necessarily at this time.
Low. Clarifying questions?
Yes. Hey, Jay, Mr. Langless. So the 4-year English credit that I guess DOE is not budging on, is that what that is?
Yeah, so I reached out to DOE, as I mentioned to you last time. We were trying to project what would it look like if we didn't have the year's worth of credit, because how do you do certain things if you didn't have the year and all of that? And so I reached out to DOE and I asked if any of the graduation requirements would be subject to modification given the state language, especially in English. And I was asking about English because of particularly our ELL population of students who, a lot of them double up in their senior year to get that 4th credit because of our programming when they first come into high school. Not all students, but some. It limits them from getting grade level English credits. So I reached out to DOE and I asked about that. And the response I got back, and it was very cordial and timely, and they said that they would not be modifying graduation requirements at this time for English.
Okay. So 4 credits in English, is that, how do you get that 1 credit? How long is the course?
Yeah, so those are year-long courses.
That's troublesome, because that's going to affect every single student, like freshman, sophomore, that just doesn't make sense to me. I mean, does that not make sense to you?
It's in English every year, and we've done a good job, I think, over the years of building in the options and pathways for kids to achieve that. And I think we'll do the same this year. You know, we really want to take care of the kids through that month of May and make sure they have the skills and concepts they need to move forward. And hopefully with that work, they can maintain and or fix and recoup that English credit for this year. And we'll continue to work forward to support them.
Okay. Second question. So the survey that you had sent out, and there was a small portion of the teachers that could not live with it. Could you give me some feedback, or did you get any feedback on what they couldn't live with?
I'd rather speak in general terms. There was actually one person that said that they couldn't live with it. And so if I give too much specific feedback, it might single somebody out. So I don't want to do that. But part of the context was, how do we make up the grades for this year? Or not make up as in recover. What are the components that go into creating that grade? And so it's based on what evidence the student has provided. It's the semester grade, the projected year 1 grade, which is already in PowerSchool electronically calibrated, or a teacher can issue a grade based on the evidence that they have and or the makeup work a kid does. And the thinking behind it was that it would be the greatest of the 3 grades, so to make sure we're not penalizing kids. And there was more than one person that brought up, how do we get into the question with remote learning of how do we know the kids actually doing the work and things of that nature. And it's a real challenge, I think, and that's why the blended model is so much better, in my opinion, than just the online work. But that was part of the hang up, was if I have a student who is really on the line, how do I know they're doing the work? And I think that's a challenge. It's a real challenge. And there's ways to design that makeup work that might minimize opportunities for students to find the answers using some of the tools that are available, but it's possible.
Okay, thank you. That's it.
Welcome.
Okay. Mr. Potvin,
Jake, can you bring the slideshow back to the requirements that the state has, the 11, I guess 11 credits, if I remember it right?
I don't did I leave that in this slideshow? I don't know. This one here is our current policy of 24.
You had one up there that said the state was going with 11.
The
There it
state,
is.
yes. So this is what we're proposing for 18 credits. The 11 is a reference to what the state requires. The state minimum is 11 credits.
Can you go over what those 11 credits are? What
Yeah. They're essentially components here. We added some credits in the health PE area here, but it's 2 math, 2 science, 2 social studies. One of the sciences has to be a lab, 4 English, and 1 visual performing arts. I believe is the 11 for the state.
Additional elective credits. All right.
Mhm.
So those additional elective credits, that's being required for graduation, correct?
So what we're saying is 18 is a reasonable, straight face, we believe, adjustment from the 24 that we typically require because of the disruption. And I just wanted to make sure that I had on the slide the makeup of what that is for a student at Lewiston High School if we went with this modification.
All right. You probably don't have this answer, but if off the top of your head, if you guys talk this out, if we went with just the 11 required by the state, does that open the graduation door to more students that might be on that that cusp list, you know, that where they're not quite there, or they
We actually did do this work, Mr. Poffin, because we wanted to know that we weren't penalizing kids, but we're also not creating a landslide that doesn't pass the straight face test. What we found is if we go lower, so let's say we go to the 11, it doesn't make a huge change in the graduation percentages because the courses that students don't have the credits are some of this makeup. So the students that don't have the 4 English, that don't have the lab science, and those are the areas in which students often struggle. So if you look at it from that perspective, if we went with 11 and we had just the core, we dropped the additional elective credits, the number actually won't change a lot. It would go up probably some, but it wouldn't change a lot because the students who are still not on pace to graduate because of the way we've done our schedule, they would still not be on pace to graduate, many of them.
okay. Second question, do you, well, the one thing I noticed is the parents that have the younger students kind of resigned themselves that, you know, we're done for school for the year. However, the senior parents are totally different. A lot of response out there that they want their kid to get as much as they can above and beyond for graduation. They want their studies to be whole and they want a graduation. That being said, is there any model, and given the fact that we have an entire teacher staff being paid right now, where we could reallocate teacher resources to address not so much the ones who already have the credits, but the ones that are lagging behind, to be able to assign teachers an extra help to give them that boost to get them above that above that curve. I was just wondering if there's a opportunity there.
Yeah, so if we build this out, if I go a little more detailed than some of the plans are in the letters, as we get down to those finer points, I think you make excellent points there. What would happen is when we get back from break, I'd be asking teachers to close the grade book. And it's not closed permanently, it's closed for now, so students know exactly where they stand. And then the very next step is who needs what and how do we get them what they need? And if the what is I need to recover things, we're going to provide that. If the what is I want to learn the other information that I might have otherwise learned this year, we're going to provide opportunities for that. And if the what is, hey, I'm doing well, I don't need to do any makeup, but I don't want to just be home doing nothing for the next month and a half, 2 months, that we have that accelerated option where kids can jump in and take a full course and earn credit and have it be on their transcript. So we've tried to cover the right now and I need recovery, the right now so I know where I stand, but I want to continue to learn, and the right now I know where I stand and I want to move forward. We try to cover those 3 areas.
Okay.
And teachers will be involved in that process. I have to rely on my content folks. The work they do is amazing, but they'll help develop those things that will be used to cover from what would have been done for the rest of the school year. They'll be directly involved in that.
Okay.
Miss Ray?
Thank you. And are we just doing clarification right now?
Yes, these are just questions about the plan.
Okay, so my first question is actually for you, Ms. Roy, about what part of this are we voting on tonight? Because there's a number of slides and we may not agree with all of it. Or Mr. Langless, maybe, because
I guess from a policy perspective, what would be really helpful for me is support on this proposed graduation criteria, because those are the things that land in policy. Some of the other components, I would love your input, but I can't move forward unless we have this policy piece figured out so I know how to map that out.
Yeah, I would say our piece is to approve the proposed graduation criteria.
Okay.
Not so much how that's done. We got to trust that our people are going to do this the right way.
Okay, and that I'm comfortable with. It's just a lot of information to absorb at once with everything else flying around. So I just wanted to make that point before.
I wanted to speak some things in there for the seniors. I know they're antsy about it.
I'm sure, and I can sympathize with that, but I also want us to make sound decisions and not reactions. So clarification questions. If you're just asking us to vote on pretty much this slide, then I'm good with this slide.
Mr. Finn, can I ask you to chime in? Were there other things that you were expecting to come from this vote so we make sure that we do a proper motion and vote?
No, this would. Okay, good. This would be the one thing that we would need the board to get a look at and and approve or not. As with everything else, we really feel as though since we all got together in January, we feel as though we're a problem-solving body as well. Oftentimes, you'll see that we'll come to the committee for genuine feedback. And so for all of the other slides, I've actually taken a ton of notes on some real good points that were raised, and I want to get to Mr. Potvin's here in a second if I possibly could. But for clarification, this is the one area that would be in policy that we'd need some help with.
Yes, and then anything further down the line, if we needed to adjust graduation requirements overall or for the next class, then we would address that at a different time.
Correct.
Can I also add that the language that I'd like to make sure that we're working with is this would only be applicable to students who were enrolled in Lewiston High School when we went into our break. So this shouldn't create transfers. This shouldn't create other scenarios. This should only be for students who were actively enrolled at the date of the disruption.
And this would be for the class of 2020.
Correct.
Okay, Ms. Ray, do you have more questions?
No, I of course have opinions, no one's surprised. But I think in terms of moving forward with graduation criteria, this is the information we need.
Okay. Mr. Langless, could I ask you to stop sharing your screen so I could do a roll call and discussion session. Thank you, sir. I do want to, I had somebody write to me from the public about this topic. They said they weren't sure how to, that they didn't get the address, so they just wrote to me. I just want to make sure that, Jake, if you could answer this question. I heard we are using midterm grades for determining valedictorian and top 10 for graduation. Then why are we not using these midterm grades for all students as their end of year grade for at least the seniors? I think you answered this, but could you address it again?
Sure. Actually the top 10 conversation happens at mid-year. Once semester grades are in, we build that top 10 off of that transcript information. The ongoing work, we didn't want to discredit the work kids have done, and we really want to have that motivational piece for kids to keep at it. So I think that's why we went to that March 13th date and want to provide the opportunities for more learning.
Okay, thank you. I will entertain a motion if there's one out there.
So moved.
So moved what, Ms. Parks? You can't get away with that
You
one.
wouldn't let me get out that easily. I move that we accept the recommendations as Principal Langley has described.
To accept the proposed graduation requirements to students enrolled at Lewiston High School for the class of 2020.
That's exactly what I was meaning to say, yes.
Mr. Finn, did you get that motion written down properly?
I do, yes.
Okay. Was there a second?
Second.
Mr. Potvin. Further discussion, I'll go around the table. Ms. Parks.
No, just thank you, Jake, and everybody involved for all the work that you've put on this. I appreciate it.
Mr. Damon.
I guess I'm still concerned about the idea that we can't offer half credits. This will probably sound, like some old guy being crotchety, which I'll take credit for that. I find it very discouraging to think that we run the school district as either a semester or half credit based solely on an NCAA rule. They've screwed up enough things over the years that shouldn't be a criteria for how we run our educational program. And I guess going forward, it might be something we ought to address. That's all I got.
And I think that we will be addressing certain things, as Mr. Langlis alluded to. As far as I'm concerned, honestly, Jake, I appreciate the thoroughness of this and your whole team. I personally was very happy to see just a week of events, as a senior parent. It gives little hope and encouragement. And I know that it is helpful for people to think that these things are still possible. And, as far as the credits go, as long as the core requirements are being taken care of, where I feel that if you're going into either the workforce or onto college, if students are covered, especially our seniors are covered under that, it's a shame that they can't get some of that elective stuff, but I really feel that this goes beyond what the state is asking, which I don't think is enough, and is enough to say that a graduate from Lewiston High School is prepared enough to move forward at this point in time. So I appreciate that. Mr. Majerus Collins.
I have so many different conflicting feelings on this question, and I guess I do want to start with echoing what everyone else has said in terms of an appreciation for all the hard work that Principal Langlis and the other folks at LHS have done to try to put this together and to try to make sure that our seniors and their families have a good sense of what's happening. There's parts of this that trouble me, but I'm not sure that they're really avoidable. I did want to raise one issue with regard to something that Principal Langlis said at the very end, which was about these only applying to students who were enrolled on March 13th. And I don't necessarily have an issue with that in concept, but my understanding was that we were still under obligation from the state to continue accepting new students into the district even during the shutdown. And I was just wondering how that stipulation interacts with our obligations to students who might be moving into the district during this time.
Mr. Finn or Mr. Langlis, could you address that?
Mr. Langlis?
Yeah, I could start by chiming in. So part of what happened is after the first meeting, when we did our first read, I got a few emails and questions from people who had actually gone a different route for their educational plan, including things like adult education. But I don't mean recently, I mean some as far back as early last fall. And so they've been in a totally separate educational environment. And I think you bring up a good point, because we do have students who are enrolling, and that's just fine. It's hard with students from class of 2020 wanting to jump back in. They didn't have a schedule, they weren't attending, and now they want to have the year's worth of classes provided in a remediation model over a 1-month window, because we are looking at modifying graduation requirements for students who were doing the work all year but can't get back into the school to continue. It's a catch-22. I agree with you. It's got its complexities for sure.
And I think to clarify and build off of what Principal Langlis was talking about, I think it would be safe to say that, well, we know that as Member Majerus Collins had pointed out, if somebody enrolls their residents of Lewiston and they're entitled to a free and appropriate public education, we can't stop them from enrolling, and therefore they would also enjoy the benefits of being, part of Lewiston. It goes far beyond just graduation, by the way. However, Mr. Langlis, I think in the spirit of what you were saying, it maybe looked a lot more like superintendent's agreements, folks wanting to jump from one district to the next. Oftentimes that happens. We would not normally see it at this time of the year, but it would probably be something that we would not agree to, something from who is currently living out of district, that would see it maybe an advantageous path to graduation by having the superintendents agree to enroll in Lewiston. Probably be something that would watch very, very closely and more than likely would not entertain. But law comes first. We know that law comes first, then policy, and we work our way through. So there would be no violation of any law if a child moved into Lewiston and established residence here and came and enrolled. They would be entitled to all the benefits of being a Lewiston public school student.
Yeah, and I want to just say again that I agree with the spirit of what of that stipulation, and saying that somebody shouldn't be able to avail themselves of a less rigorous route to graduation that they initially didn't expect, had opted to go a different route. There's no reason on the merits that should be allowed. I just wanted to double check, make sure that the district is 100% sure that stipulation is allowable, and if it is, I'm all for it. I guess with regard to what Member Damon said earlier, if we're adopting slightly different standards than Auburn, then that sort of presents a real possibility that what Superintendent Finn would just said might be an incentive for some people.
Yeah, and I think that only if they actually move to the district, because at this point, if you ask to be put into the district, it is up to the superintendent to decide. So
would it be?
I'm not sure if we should modify the motion or not.
I'm curious if it would be, if it would help resolve it if we just verified address and residency in Lewiston for any students coming into class of 2020. Harder to do right now because we're not in session, but we could follow up with students.
I guess my only issue with how, I mean, I don't even necessarily have an issue with how this is presented, and I also guess I would ask a clarifying question. This is a first read, right? So this would come
No.
back to us. No, it's not.
No, this is the second time we're hearing it, only with more detail. We heard in a workshop
Right.
from Mr. Langlis, so we need to move this forward so seniors, they can start their
okay.
plans. Yeah,
Yeah.
so,
I mean, it sounds like it's the superintendent's discretion to accept someone who isn't in the district, and presumably we have standard policies in place for people to enroll if they do move to the district.
mhm.
And there wouldn't necessarily, I mean, to my mind, there wouldn't be any need to make those more rigorous, just to have them be as they always are.
Ms. Whitlow?
I have no comments.
Thank you. Mr. Potvin?
So first, I'll echo Mr. Damon's concerns about the half credits. I think we're going to be going into a very complex time for the next year. And I think we have to maybe open up and take a look at this, because I think there's going to be an awful lot of situations where kids might be coming up a little bit short. We may be changing our scheduling, our structure. There's so many things that are coming in play that I think it should be evaluated, at least, that to take a look how this could work. With that in mind, also mention we're voting on this for the seniors for this year. The juniors this year are going through just as much complexity, probably even more, because a lot of the stuff right now is just practice that they don't have getting counted towards their grades. I'm concerned about juniors entering next year, disadvantaged, missing pieces because of what's happening now, and then have to take a look at a graduation of 24 credits as opposed to their siblings this year who are getting the 18 credits. And I'm wondering if we should be taking a look at expanding this to include for the next year's class also, or is that something we can review and take up at a different time? What do you think, Jake?
I think I would love to be involved in that process to look at graduation requirements for our school as a whole. And I think we absolutely will look out for our juniors. But I do think that's something we want to take up a little while down the road.
I think that's the intention of this, is to take care of this year and not have to rush into decisions for next year without exploring every single, well, not every single, we as much as we can on the effects of juniors. And I think, again, then that overall picture of things like half credit, schedule, and all of those kinds of policy issues when it comes to LHS students. So,
Okay.
thank you. Ms. Ray?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just something that came up through the previous comments that I might suggest we enact this as emergency policy, just so it goes into effect immediately and does not require a second read. I'm not sure how that works here versus the city. All I can think of is the city procedure right now, but I just wanted to put that out there if you wanted to consider that, Madam Chair.
I think that makes sense. So it
I believe it's a
procedurally,
motion
you're
to
saying
forego
it
the
says
rules.
something else? It's an emergency amendment, or, I mean,
That doesn't sound
emergency.
like the right language, but that's how we would handle it at the city level, to waive a second reading of an ordinance and for it to go into effect immediately. It looked like Mr. Langlis had something to say on that, though.
Oh, go ahead.
I just recall other situations and some things may have shifted, but I believe as a group, someone can motion to forego the rules and change this policy. That's your call, though.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely do not want to go to a whole nother meeting. So whatever language we have to put in to state that this is an emergency situation, which is why we are, I mean, we did have a workshop, but you're right, we didn't have a first read that we voted on for this. So I would like to add the language, or is it a member that has to make that? Miss Ray, do you know?
Oh, sure. I would just recommend after this, we suspend the rules and take a vote on the second reading, but because I'm not sure about emergency for school committee, I apologize. I didn't look at that before.
Okay,
Okay, so on this point, I was really pleased to see the on track percentage, Mr. Langless. That was so affirming to see. I definitely agree with the 18 credits. The part that I'm really hung up on, just to give you some guidance in my thought process, is the future classes until July 31st. As we face down a really tough budget year next year, I don't want to commit us to something additional past June 30th. It sounds like the commencement and graduation activities are being shifted from now until then. And so that seems appropriate to carry forward. And hopefully the CAO can provide for that carry forward so those expenses are still covered. But if we're looking at different teaching expectations for our educators, that gives me serious pause and a little heartburn. So I just wanted to raise that while we're talking about this, but I'm fully in support of the 18 credits and the way that you've constructed them to be appropriate for our learners. So thank you so much for your work on that.
thank you.
So should
Ms.
we
Whit-
suspend the rules so that we can vote on this?
Yes, that's a motion to suspend the rules.
Yes.
Madam Chair, so we already have a motion on the table. We would just take that motion, vote on it, and then suspend the rules to add the second reading.
Okay, so we take a roll call on the first one and then suspend the rules. Do I have to do a whole nother roll call for that?
Yeah, it's messy, but I think that's the most appropriate for school committee versus council. Sorry, I should have looked that up.
All right, so let's vote on this for the motion that's on the floor. And I'll start with Ms. Parks.
Yes.
Mr. Damon,
Could we have Superintendent Finn restate the motion, please?
yes. Mr. Finn,
So are we talking about the motion to suspend the rules yet?
no, the first motion that Ms. Parks made about the class of 2020.
So this is solely for the class of 2020.
Yes, this is the vote that the motion was.
So Megan asked a question about May 11th and what that meant. Jake had mentioned that that was a cutoff in the event that
No.
June was possible.
No, the motion that Ms. Parks put forward to approve the graduation, I can't think of the words because it was on Jake's slide and I don't have it in front of me.
Graduation criteria for the class
Thank
of
you.
2020.
Yes. That's what we're voting on, Mr. Damon,
So
the 18 credits.
and how they've gotten to where they're at.
Yes,
Okay. Yes.
I apologize.
thank you.
I was going
Sorry.
way back in my notes. I went too far back.
I say yes. Mr. Majerus Collins,
Yes.
Ms. Whitlow,
Yes.
Mr. Potvin,
Yes.
Ms. Ray.
Yes.
Okay, that was unanimous. And now we entertain Miss Whitlow's move to,
Suspend the rules for this, not the second reading, to, I don't know how to say that.
To forego
Waive
the
the-
second.
Correct, to forego the second reading. Here we go.
Second.
Mr. Potvin seconded that. Okay. So just a roll call again, Ms. Ray, correct?
That is my understanding.
All righty. Ms. Parks?
Yes.
Mr. Damon?
Yes.
I say yes. Mr. Majerus Collins?
Yes.
Ms. Whitlow?
Yes.
Mr. Potvin?
Yes.
And Ms. Ray?
Yes.
We learn something new each time, I feel like. Thank you so much. Want to make sure we do things properly. All right. Moving on to agenda item number 8. Actually, we will be moving into executive session. So, oh, Mr. Finn, yes? Sorry?
Yes. I wanted to answer just a couple of questions that aren't really related to the vote at all. I wanted to point out that after really taking a good look at Mr. Langlis's plan, I was really drawn to the quality of those 18 credits and not necessarily a quantity piece. And I liked the way that aligned with what we were trying to do. A lot of members made comments on that, and I appreciate that. I wanted to address what Mr. Potvin was speaking about for those kids that are almost there, that second sliver of pie on Mr. Langlis's graphic there. And something that we'd spoken about is developing a task force that will be able to focus on those kids there. Because one thing we do know is that if they're almost there, we can get them over the top. But that would require, as Mr. Potvin had mentioned, a group of teachers that are just crazy about kids, that will do whatever it takes to get these kids what they need so that they can get over that top. And even in that last sliver, some of those students that need further work, we would look at that and say, there's probably a few in there too that we might be able to, to move forward in a way that would allow them to reach their goals as well. So I wanted to just put a nod towards Mr. Potvin and his idea, and just point out that this is something that Jake's working on right now to come up with that task force for those students that need further work. And then finally, talking about innovative scheduling moving forward, COVID-19 has really exposed a lot of things about all school systems in America. And one thing that we've learned about ourselves here in Lewiston is that we have an opportunity here to be a lot more innovative in scheduling so that we can apply half credits when needed. We talked about concepts of block scheduling, 4x4s, skinny blocks, ways to do scheduling so that should something like this happen again, it wouldn't be so burdensome on teachers and students. And we wouldn't be reinventing the wheel. I have recommended a couple of school systems that are doing this type of work for Mr. Langlis and his team to tap into. I actually see a huge opportunity here for us moving forward as we start redefining what that high school experience should look like and why it should look that way, but also how we do business. And if nothing else, COVID-19 has taught us some things. And one thing it taught us is we have to be a lot more efficient, effective, and nimble. I think we use that word nimble. And if our current man-made constructs are holding us back from doing that, we need to go back and look at those constructs. So lots of great discussions. I can't wait for future workshops that we'll have on this. There are just such great thinkers in this group that I'll bet, I know that we'll come out with something that's a lot more innovative moving forward. And I think COVID-19 actually forced the issue. So I appreciate that.
Point of order, Madam Chair.
Wait. Yes, sir.
Do we not need a subsequent vote after the suspension of rules to address second reading of the vote?
My understanding is that by waiving the second reading, we don't have to do another vote, that the first vote counts. That's it.
Okay,
The suspension of the rules is saying we don't need to have another vote.
okay.
But thank you.
Just want to double check that.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, so the next part is to enter into executive session. And this is our first time doing this virtually, but I know City Council has done this before and other school committees. My understanding is that others will leave. The live stream will be gone. Mr. Terrio is going to make sure to shut that off, and then he's going to leave, and it will just be as if we were in a regular executive